Hello and welcome everybody back to Talkin Ball. I'm Pat Leonard from the New York Daily News here on the Believe Podcast Network. Week 9 of the NFL is here. Can't believe we're this deep into the season. Huge news coming down the day I sit here recording this podcast on the Washington Commanders. We're going to get to that in a second. Really quickly, though, excited that a couple sponsors have jumped on board starting here in officially episode 10, if you don't include our instant reaction to the Kadarius Toney trade. But Bet Online is on board. We're thrilled to have them. Remember to stand and stay here into the third segment and our final segment for Pat's picks and some of my favorite picks every week. And that brings us to our first of many, we hope, live reads. Basketball is back, and Bet Online remains your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at Bet Online. And as your continued source for all sports wagering information, Bet Online features live betting, free contests, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports and events, whether that's NFL, NBA, NHL, MMA, tennis, boxing, or even golf. Head to betonline.ag to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE, that's all caps BLEAV, to receive your rewards. Bet Online, where the game starts. And where our game starts is in Washington, D.C., where the Commanders, the Snyders, are willing to sell the team. Forbes reports that the Snyders are looking into selling at least part of the franchise, and there has been no pushback to me or to anybody else covering the league as we have dug into this throughout the day that it would not be a sale of the entire franchise. Some speculation that the Snyders would only try to sell a piece, but I've talked to sources already who tell me that the Snyders in this franchise, they are, quote, cash poor. And given all of the scandals and investigations surrounding them and the pressure put by Colts owner Jim Irsay, as well as others behind the scenes, it seems to have finally come to a head. And the Washington Commanders statement that appears to confirm the Forbes report that I obtained from a source as well. Dan and Tanya Snyder and the Washington Commanders announced today that they have hired B of A, that's Bank of America Securities, to consider potential transactions. The Snyders remain committed to the team, all of its employees, and its countless fans to putting the best product on the field and continuing the work to set the gold standard for workplaces in the NFL. Because that statement was a little bit vague, a lot of reporters, including myself, reached back out and said, well, is a sale of the entire franchise possible of the majority share, or is this just about selling a minority stake? And the response back was they are considering and pursuing all options. And so when you don't get pushback from Dan Snyder, which as we've seen in recent weeks, the ESPN story by Seth Wickersham and others that uncovered a lot of the dirt and behind the scenes efforts to get Snyder out. Snyder released statements blasting that, accusing reporters in the media of people having axes to grind and making things up. He said before he would never change the team name. He eventually did. He said here that he would never sell the franchise. Now it seems he will. Here's my take on this. I think this is going to get even uglier before it gets better, because as good of news as this is for the NFL, Dan Snyder and Tanya Snyder are releasing this statement, in my opinion, for one reason. It has to be that the Mary Jo White investigation, the former chairman of the Security and Exchange Commission, who is conducting the NFL's investigation into the Snyders and the Washington franchise on behalf of the league, that investigation has to be close to wrapping up. And I would be willing to bet a lot that the Snyders have an idea that all of the negative isn't even the word, all of the absurd realities behind the scenes of this Washington franchise and organization, all of the sexual harassment claims, all of the previous investigations, including the one last year that got buried by the NFL and Roger Goodell, and shame on the league for doing that. But this decision by Dan Snyder, this about face, only happens with excellent reporting. As I mentioned, Seth Wickersham leading the charge there, and ESPN and others at the Washington Post. It happens with diligent coverage of the truth of advocating for people without a voice. But it also happens, in my opinion, with Dan Snyder recognizing most likely that we are soon going to hear, if not just as bad, details about what happened in recent years with this organization and under this ownership. It could get even worse. The money is crazy. The Denver Broncos just sold this past year for $4.65 billion. Dan Snyder purchased this team in 1999 for $750 million. So if he sells the whole team, he could get over $5 billion. So toss that number around in your head. The best thing for the NFL and the fans down there for the Washington Commanders organization is that obviously employees and the organization will, in the long run, treat people better, which is the most important thing. But for the fans and the game day experience, Washington, presumably under this new ownership, will finally get the stadium that a lot of public officials want to build for them in various areas that the Snyders have negotiated with, the DC, Virginia, et cetera. But no one is willing to build it because of the stipulations that they don't want to work with this man. And they want the realities and the truth to come out about these investigations that the NFL has helped bury. So great news in the NFL that hopefully it looks like the development here is that Dan Snyder will be eventually, sooner rather than later, selling the Washington franchise, which is a historic franchise in this league. And Washington having stable ownership and getting itself back on track, back on its feet, and from a football perspective, not having a know-nothing owner meddling in everything will make a huge difference in the NFC East and in the NFL. And like I said, most importantly, to the people who work there. Now, shifting over to current football matters, I was interested to look at the two first-year GMs in Chicago and New York specifically this week at the trade deadline and notice how differently they handled their situations. No coincidence, of course, that Joe Schoen's Giants are 6-2, and he was less active as far as selling players compared to Ryan Poles and Chicago, which is 3-5, where he trades Roquan Smith, their middle linebacker, and Robert Quinn, their edge rusher, to Baltimore and Philadelphia, respectively. But the difference is stark. Joe Schoen sells Kadarius Toney for a late third-round pick and a sixth. The Chicago Bears, Ryan Poles, he gives up sum total of all of his moves leading up to the deadline. He gives up Robert Quinn, Roquan Smith, and a second-round pick in the Chase Claypool trade to Pittsburgh. He gets back Claypool, a receiver with an extra year still to go after this, I believe, on a rookie contract, some help for Justin Fields, and with those other trades, he nets a second-round pick back, a fourth, and a fifth. Both of these situations are long-term rebuilds. Both of these situations were inherited by young general managers who were on the same page with ownership that this was not going to be a quick fix. Kudos to Ryan Poles for making difficult decisions in the interest long-term of the club. Players that, even though they valued, in Smith's instance, for example, trying to get a deal done, but this is a player who was a holdover from the previous regime, who wasn't commanding the respect and money he felt like he deserved there, and who ends up going to a team with a better fit. Curious and interesting that Poles would be willing to trade his own team's second-round pick for a wide receiver, despite the fact that Claypool is very good and certainly can help them. Former Giants receivers coach Tyke Tolbert over there has to be smiling. But when you look at what Joe Schoen and the Giants did not do, they did not and would not trade a second-round pick for a receiver, even though they were in that market. They wanted Jerry Jeudy. I know that for a fact. League sources told me the Giants were hot and heavy after Jeudy when it became clear that Denver would listen to those calls. This was not a situation where the Broncos were shopping Jerry Jeudy, but once his name got out there as potentially available, and the Broncos obviously were struggling, and before they beat Jacksonville, there was a real chance that if they lose that game, I mean, you saw they already traded Bradley Chubb. Who knows whether that flips a switch and they turn into a different mode in 24 hours leading up to the deadline. But before the Broncos decided they weren't going to trade Jeudy, the Giants were among the, if not the most aggressive teams pursuing a player that Brian Daboll knew for a quick time, going back to his 1 year at offensive coordinator at Alabama when Jerry Jeudy was a freshman for the Crimson Tide. But the Giants and Joe Schoen were never going to spend that premier asset. And so it's an interesting look at how two teams in similar positions manage their deadline. The Giants, obviously at 6-2, would have been you would think, a stronger candidate to maybe add that extra round pick on to get the player, the receiver in a Claypool or a Jeudy to get it done and get Daniel Jones an extra weapon because suddenly they're in the playoff race. But I understand Shane's long-term view of this, and I think it's a reasonable one to take. From Daniel Jones's side of it, I think it's a difficult one probably to swallow because he's played very well. And here he is on a team where the first round pick they had from a year ago, they trade away. Now, listen, that was about a player who just was never going to fit here. But the idea of having some talent in the building that could come back and augment your offense, obviously that's out the window now. It's just about Kenny Golladay getting healthy and that's it, waiting in the wings with Sterling Shepard down with the knee injury. So from a Daniel Jones perspective and a Giants competing this year perspective, it would be natural to look at it as the player or somebody and say, well, wait a second, are we really trying to win here if we're not going to get a guy? But remember that Joe Schoen inherited a salary cap situation that made it difficult for him to also, he had to shrink the pool of players he was examining and looking at because they only had $3 million in cap space going into the trade deadline. And that's for the remainder of the season. So as they make practice squad signings, as they elevate guys and they have to pay them more on those game days and game weeks, Shane actually admitted he might even have to make another restructure. And so it was not like the Giants could just, scan the NFL, scan the rosters of every team, write down their wish list and kind of go with unlimited assets. They could have gotten creative, and every team can get creative with the salary cap. But when you're looking at a long-term approach and being smart, I understand the approach. I do think it's interesting, though, that John Mara and Steve Tisch also felt comfortable about kind of standing pat. I mean, no doubt Joe Schoen was making efforts to land a player if the price was right, but we know from recent experience several times over that Giants ownership gets restless in situations like this. And especially this year when they're exceeding expectations with solid coaching the way they are and their quarterback and their number one player in Saquon Barkley on offense playing well. I find it interesting that John Mara is okay staying put, though I think long-term it could be the right answer. The question is whether it's the right thing for the current quarterback. That'll be something to examine. Sticking on a little bit of Giants, but my personal experience in week 8 of the NFL, I just wanted to tell a quick telling story about my experience in Seattle. Geno Smith, pleasure to cover in New York when he was here, and a really genuine guy. And I just wanted to take you inside the experience of how Geno ended up saying his quote about appreciating Jerry Reese and Ben McAdoo. So when you're a beat writer or a columnist and you're covering one of these games, a lot of times, let's say you're there covering the Giants like I was, after the game, you file a quick running story to go online, then you head in the elevator, you go downstairs, and you head over to a Brian Daboll head coach press conference, and then you duck into the Giants locker room and talk to the players. That's pretty standard. If you have an extra writer there, like 2 or 3 writers on a staff, you might send one to the road locker room if there's a special storyline that's applicable that week to your local readership. But me being both a Giants beat writer and also a league-wide NFL columnist, and also always looking for a story that is unique to that week that I think is what would be the most interesting thing and the most unique thing to bring back to the readers and the people who are watching this game. What would people want to know about this game that you couldn't find out just from a standard presser or somebody who didn't know these players and these teams and walk in cold? And I thought that the answer to that was, even though time has passed, Geno Smith's mentality if he were to win this game, I thought would have been very interesting to hear from him. And so I made the call myself with, the help of support from my editors, gauging and asking them, listen, what do you think? Is this worth it? Do you think readers would appreciate it? They said, go over to Seattle, and we think that's a good idea. Go see what it is. So I go to the Seahawks locker room, and typically there's no loud noises in the locker room because you're recording things on your phone or your recorder, or people have video cameras. The Seahawks were blasting music. I mean, it was deafeningly loud the whole time I was in there. But I walk in, and here's Geno Smith, who leads the league in completion percentage and, just took the upstart Seahawks to 5-3, just sitting there in his locker by himself, looking at some things on his phone, texting some people. And I go over to him and I say, hey, Geno. And I was about to reintroduce myself because I haven't seen him in person in a while. Obviously, you can communicate with guys here and there, but if you don't see them every day, they have plenty of personalities and faces to manage and remember. And so it's a lot. As I'm about to reintroduce myself, just to remind him, he looks up, sees my face. Before I can say anything, he goes, hey, Pat. And that was cool to see because, doing a story with him the spring after his one season with the Giants, I remember writing a story where I advocated this guy deserves a shot. He didn't get a fair shake here. And he was very open and honest with me. And I remembered that. And I think it speaks to him that he maintains those faces, those names, and, still appreciates that. Now, at the same time, as a reporter, in that case, I want to get a quote for myself and have it exclusively and have it sing in my story. And then everybody says, according to the Daily News. But Geno, he's trying to do the right thing in Seattle. And he was more than willing to help, but he didn't want to cross Seahawks PR. He didn't want to cross the Seattle writers. He wanted to do right by everybody who has been doing right by him in Seattle. And so he said, if they say it's okay, we can talk now. If not, I got to do it at the podium. Just be fair to everybody. So I reluctantly accept. Obviously, PR says it needs to happen at the podium. I do appreciate, though, the Seahawks PR working with me, Jeff Garza and everybody. It was great experience there. But so I end up in the Seahawks press conference, and now I'm completely skipping all Giants post-game availability. So now I'm kind of like putting all my eggs in one basket, not knowing if it's really going to pay off, because I've missed Brian Daboll's press conference, and I'm not in the Giants locker room at the moment that these guys are talking, Saquon, Nick Gates, Daniel Jones. So I'm thinking, okay, I have to phrase my question well. I have to be direct and honest with Geno, and whatever he says, he says. So Pete Carroll talks. He's funny and interesting. Then Geno Smith comes up to the podium with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and they do a press conference together. Very interesting situation to see. You don't see that often. Obviously, the players get along very well. I let the local Seattle beat writers, of course, conduct the press conference because that's just what you do. You don't jump in and ask a national question over top of people who've been covering this guy every day. That's not what you do. And so the press conference goes for 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes, and they're asking all different topics of Lockett, dropping a pass, catching a touchdown, double moving a Dory. DK Metcalf, was he hurt? Was he not? He plays. He catches a touchdown. Geno, one of the most surprising and interesting stories in the NFL. And at one point, about 8.5, 9 minutes in, I decide it's time to ask my question. So a woman and I both try to ask our question at the same time. We kind of stop, look at each other. I say, no, you go first. So she asks her question. Geno answers her question, finishes it, and then he turns and looks at me and just gives me a nod and goes, Pat, and gives me the platform, at which point I ask him, I say, Geno, do you get any sense of revenge or vindication from beating the Giants, considering how you were treated despite how professionally you conducted yourself while you were in New York? And that was the question, the sequence, and the whole decision-making process of mine that led to Geno taking the high road and saying, I have nothing against anyone in New York, but then putting his foot down and slamming his fist, metaphorically down and saying, this game was for Jerry Reese and Ben McAdoo, who believed in me, and that he didn't care for anything else other than proving his believers right. And so that was, obviously it's tough to then have his quote just blast over the airways, and now it's everybody's. That's the competitive side of our business. But I just wanted to take you kind of inside that window of how that quote came about, how that situation developed, and how much I appreciate Geno and what the Seahawks were able to do, and really just an example of why I love my job with the Daily News and now talking with you on the Believe Podcast Network. Before we get to our guest, Bennie Fowler, who is excellent this week. I mean, he's great every week, but excellent on a lot of topics, including Kadarius Toney's fit with the Chiefs. I think you'll want to hear that. I just wanted to point out that even though the Bradley Chubb trade to Miami was a huge one, and probably the biggest player add to a team that looks like it can make some noise this season, and Chase Claypool was definitely a big name and a big talent going somewhere for a heavy price. Nyheim Hines going from Indianapolis to the Buffalo Bills, to me, may end up being the biggest move that was made at this deadline. Roquan Smith to Baltimore could challenge it for sure. But because Buffalo is already, to me, and I think to everybody, a clear Super Bowl favorite, probably them, the Chiefs, and the Eagles right now, Hines was so underutilized this year, kind of out of nowhere, by the way, by Frank Reich and the Colts. He can run the ball, also extremely valuable as a receiver. And Buffalo, we know, prefers to throw it and also can get some run action going with Josh Allen able to use his wheels while also maybe using some misdirection with a guy like Hines. Giving up Zach Moss in that trade going back with a pick shows you that they're kind of all in on this pass-heavy approach, but with a dynamic run and pass threat in Hines, they can catch teams off guard and expose matchups against linebackers that Hines is going to win 10 out of 10 times. He's going to be on the field a lot for them. I don't think there's a player right now coming out of that day and that deadline day where I look and I say, I don't think there's anyone who benefits more as a player. And I think because we know the Bills are going to be playing deep into the playoffs and likely at least be in the AFC Championship, if not represent the AFC in the Super Bowl, I think the Nyheim Hines deal is the one to watch above all among everything we saw at this busy deadline. But that's all for me solo, because we're going to head over to our next segment with Super Bowl 50 champ Bennie Fowler and download on all things trade deadline, Washington, Kadarius Toney and the Chiefs, teams that are surprising, teams that are disappointing, Tom Brady and the Bucs. Can they keep it together and get something going? You don't want to miss it next on Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard. All right, welcome back to Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard. We are back with our favorite guest, Super Bowl champion, Bennie Fowler. Beans. Bennie, thanks for coming back, man.
Pat, appreciate you, man. Talking ball with you is always fun. It's always exciting. The NFL is crazy right now, so looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you. I forgot to mention last time you were on here too, and I forgot to tell the listeners that in week 3 before the Dallas Cowboys game, the mannequin in the Giants locker room, which always kind of models the uniform of that week for the team, had a white Color Rush 18 Bennie Fowler Giants jersey on. What'd you think of that?
Shout out to the Giants. Shout out to you for taking that picture. I actually called Saquon and Shep after that to see if it was, are you guys trying to bring me back? Go upstairs and bring me back, But no, it's cool to see, and just brought back some good memories of times that I had there playing with those guys and really just enjoying the moments there in that locker room.
Yeah, no, that was cool to see. Miss you in there. But we have a lot to talk about around the league, not just in New York. And I want to start with the news of the day as we record this right now is the Washington Commanders, after a Forbes report that they are going to sell, the Snyder family is going to sell. Washington essentially confirms that they've hired Bank of America to look into transactions. They're not pushing back on the suggestion that they are going to sell. Welcome news to a lot of people around the league. I wanted to ask you, Bennie, as a player, when a franchise is this poorly run and operated, is Washington considered a joke among players? Do players see an organization like this and not want to play there? Does it trickle down to the locker room?
I wouldn't say that when I talk to players about other organizations and franchises. I would say I would ask that question more of to the coaches, because they're actually interacting with the owners and the president of the team more on a day-to-day. From a player standpoint, we're more looking at the coaches and seeing how they operate and because that's who we're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. Now, we do sometimes, get inside information on what the owner is saying and what they want, but I think we're as players, we more have the conversations in terms of like, who are we playing for as a coach? And, you want to go play for a Sean Payton, or you want to go play for Gary Kubiak, or Bill Belichick, some of the top coaches around the league or that have been coaches in this league. So I think from a player standpoint, you're more looking at, who are you playing for and playing, for in terms of the head coach on a day-to-day basis. I think that's where most of it comes into play, because some of these owners some can, kind of be no-shows. You never really see them, and then some are super involved, like a Jerry Jones, or before Pat Bowlen got sick and the Broncos got sold, he's very instrumental in terms of being at practice. So you want to play for an owner like that if you know they're super involved.
What about the stadium? Because one of the major issues from a league perspective is Snyder is essentially he's kryptonite. No one will touch him, and nobody wants to build a stadium, is willing to build a stadium for him in any of these surrounding states and counties, because they don't want to work with this guy. So from a player standpoint, when you go into FedEx Field, does it feel like an old stadium? Is it a trash place to play? Or when you're on the field there, is it like anything else?
I only had good experiences at FedEx Field. So, caught a touchdown from Eli Manning there, saw Saquon make some incredible plays. I think we had that game where we kind of, when I was playing with New York, Eli, and we kind of blew them out. Odell didn't play that game, but we blew them out. Like, I scored, Sterling scored. We just had an incredible game. So I have nothing but good memories at FedEx Field. So I never really paid attention to it. It's a little bit of an older locker room, but when you get out there and when you get to the field, it's no different than when we were playing against the Raiders, when I was playing with the Broncos at the Oakland Coliseum. Yeah, it's a super old field, but like the fan base, you don't even pay attention to it because you're focused on the game. So, it'll be interesting to see. That's super interesting insight from you, just in terms of, people don't want to do work with this guy. So I think it's going to be great for the league if he does end up selling.
I guess you guys love playing on grass too, compared to turf, right? So even though it's an old stadium, it's grass surface. So like, you welcome that, right?
Absolutely, all the time. Grass is the best you can, the best for players in terms of, just injuries, but then impact, soreness after the game. You play on turf, you're sore for days after the game just because of the turf. So.
Interesting. Well, shifting over to the real football going on the field right now, and we're just coming out of an exciting NFL trade deadline day. 10 trades made on this day, which is double the most since 2012. I think 5 in 2017 was the most prior to that in that span. So a crazy amount of deals made here, Benny. And I wanted to run down a few to you and get your opinion on which one you think is most impactful for a team from here on out the rest of this season, and then maybe some of the elements of the other deals that you either find interesting or you think might make a difference. So the ones that I highlighted are Bradley Chubb going from Denver to the Miami Dolphins, Nyheim Hines going to the Super Bowl favorite Buffalo Bills from Indianapolis at running back, Chase Claypool, the Steelers wide receiver, going to the Chicago Bears, and then Robert Quinn to the Eagles, the pass rusher from Chicago, and you also have Roquan Smith going to Baltimore from Chicago to play in the middle of that defense. So which one do you look at there in that flurry of trades and say, this is going to be the most impactful from here on out?
Man, to be honest, all of those trades, I think the Dolphins, what they're doing, especially after, getting off to a really good start, it shows their locker room that they're all in. When you get a pass rusher like, Chubb, and you add that to your team, I think he has more sacks than anybody on their team. I think their leader on their team has like 3.5. He has 5.5. So when you add a player like that, he's a game wrecker. He's a first round pick for a reason. Miami always has that great weather late down in the season, so he can keep the body fresh. So I think that's an impactful trade. I like the Roquan Smith trade just to Baltimore. He fits their culture. He's a great middle linebacker, great tackler. The Robert Quinn trade they already have a stout defensive front, but adding Robert Quinn to that, which only creates more one-on-ones for Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox, is an enormous trade. And then what Buffalo did with that running back, it just increases the weapons that they have. and just gives Josh Allen even more options. I think even when it comes to that run threat and that read option type of play and what they're doing,
Mm.
that makes it even more powerful as a runner and as Josh Allen as a weapon, because now they have even more of a run threat with Hines. So I think all the trades that were done, the people that were receiving, the teams that were receiving players are all in win now mode, and they all have a legit chance and shot to win. So it was incredible to see. And don't sleep on what the Kansas City did with Kadarius. Um, that just becomes that becomes a crazy weapon for them. Even if he's only on the field for 10 plays a game, like Andy Reid and what he will be able to do with that type of weapon is pretty interesting.
You're going to be hosting this podcast soon, because that was my next question was, will he make a difference there? Will Kadarius, with a change of scenery, can a player like that figure it out? Snap of fingers and, oh, wait, right system, new environment, fresh start. And can it all click that quickly for a guy?
Absolutely. I look at Isaiah McKenzie in Buffalo. I was with Isaiah McKenzie for a year in Denver, and then I think he stayed for 2 years. And the fans and the front office, didn't necessarily like. They thought, he was just a missed. They missed an opportunity, or they didn't think he was the right guy in Denver. He goes to Buffalo, gets in the right situation with Dayball and Sean McDermott calling the plays, and now IMAC has been there for the last couple of years, has signed 2 contracts, and has got and made some great money. And he is a dynamic playmaker, kick return specialist, punt return specialist for them, all their gadget plays. I mean, he just scored last weekend on Sunday Night Football against the Packers. So a change of scenery can always do something great. Ryan Tannehill being the quarterback for the Dolphins, in a prove-it situation, goes to Tennessee and then gets $100 million contract. So you see it all the time in terms of a change of scenery with players. Stephon Diggs, no different. He was already a dynamic player in Minnesota, but he goes to Buffalo, and then he's now considered the best receiver in the game, and his stats are showing it. So, yeah, I think it could be a great change of scenery for Kadarius. I don't know him personally, but hey, it could be.
That's an interesting perspective. Was Isaiah always a hard worker? And the reason I ask that is because Kadarius definitely profiles as a guy who needs to figure out a little bit of the process that you were so good at, not only doing yourself, but imparting to young guys of, here's how you be a pro. Here's how you function every day. Here's how you conduct yourself at practice. Here are the habits you need to make part of your daily routine. Because I wonder if Andy Reid and the Chiefs will feel like they need to give him a mentor and really invest that way directly in kind of holding a guy's hand, so to speak, or, is this the NFL and you either have to figure that part out yourself or you'll just drown?
I think IMAC was always a hard worker. I just think it was just the times and the situation, which is super important to a player. I was listening to the radio the other day, and, they were talking about Bradley Chubb's career here. And then they were giving a lot of flack to John Elway for not drafting Josh Allen instead of drafting Bradley Chubb. Like, hindsight is 2020. Like, yeah, look at Josh Allen now, but with the leadership and where the organization was at the time, Josh Allen wouldn't have worked out in Denver either. Like, you can't just say that now because he's thrown 50 touchdowns. What about the coaches who were there? They weren't fit, and they were talking about how Paxton Lynch was a bust or anything, a bust. But like, Paxton Lynch had first round grades from like 30 teams. What about the leadership? Nobody wants to blame the leadership. They want to blame the player. So with Kadarius, I think there might be a mindset shift that now he goes to a team who is like Super Bowl or bust. That can change your perspective as well. Like, that you're not, like, he has to fit in there, like, right into the team. He's no longer considered a first round pick in Kansas City. He's considered like, yeah, you're a piece like that's going to help us win a championship. Like, we won't coddle you. We don't care like about your status or anything like that. Like, we traded for you because we're trying to win a Super Bowl. So like, you fit in or you don't. Like, and they can win with him and they can win without him. So it's a different place when you're coaching like that.
Really good perspective. In Denver, staying in that division, what reaction have you seen or heard to them dealing away a player like Chubb? Because they got a much needed win there in London, but season still hasn't started the way they wanted it to. Now you get rid of one of your best players. What do you sense is kind of the environment around there?
If I'm a player in that locker room, we're in rebuild mode. I don't think they clearly up front we don't think we can win a Super Bowl this year. You don't trade the leading pass rusher that we have, especially with the one that we paid in free agency being hurt. So that's kind of how I think about it. I think from the fans and things that I've heard, it's just kind of mixed feelings because he is playing well this year, and like, why would you do that? And then it's like, some people think that they should have moved on. So it's just a super interesting time here in football. Like, the teams that are supposed to be doing well aren't doing well, and the teams that were just kind of, on the edge of doing great things or weren't so great are now doing really well. And I think that's the league is kind of shifting to new times.
And speaking of new times and unexpected results and change of scenery benefiting a player, I just came back from Seattle watching Geno Smith beat the Giants. And, there's people, listen, his numbers aren't at Mahomes or Allen's level at touchdown wise and that kind of thing. But you've heard whispers of, does this guy deserve to be in the MVP race? And the reason is because he is leading the league at 72.7 completion percentage. And that's averaging 7.7 yards per pass. Why do you think it is suddenly snapped and functioned for Geno Smith all of a sudden in Seattle? It's not like he just got into the league. He's bounced around to several different places, but he's not just managing these games, Benny. Like, he is legitimately helping them win and being a major part of why they're winning.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is there is no substitute for experience. Geno has been in the league for a long time. He's very self-aware. He knows who he is. And he's now operating from a place of strength. And he now has a platform and a team of leaders, the GM and the head coach, that are behind him. One of the most important things for a player as they're continuing their career is to have people who can vouch for them. It's no different than an entrepreneur looking for an anchor investor in their company. If you get a big anchor investor like a Blackstone or a BlackRock or a KKR, whatever it may be, your company has totally different. You just operate from a totally different place of strength in a different space. And I think that's one of the most important things that we should learn about Geno is that Pete Carroll believes in him, and so does the GM. And it was cool to see. I saw a little bit of his press conference after. It was cool to see him thank Jerry Reese and
McAdoo, yeah,
Bob McAdoo.
Ben McAdoo. Yeah.
So I think that's Ben McAdoo. Excuse me. I think that's important. Like, he's a pro. He's a pro's pro. Like, but it takes time. Not everybody's going to be the Peyton Manning, Tom Brady in their career, but Geno can play complementary football, which is important for getting wins in this league.
Yeah, I thought it was cool too, because I actually asked him that question that got that answer, and it was interesting and cool to see him when you talk about support. He and Lockett and Metcalf doing that presser together. Like, when they first came out and did it, as a reporter, sometimes you're thinking, oh, no, I don't want this because I want to ask Geno things. I want to ask Metcalf things. I want to ask Lockett. I don't want to miss anything that we need to cover. But it really had a visual impact on me in how, as he was telling me and telling us, like, this feels like home, it really felt, it wasn't hokey. Like, it felt real that they all were that much on the same page and behind each other, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was really cool to see. I
Yeah.
thought it was really cool to see. I think it just speaks to who he is as a leader and as a person, and that's somebody you would run through a wall for.
Happy for Geno out there. Shifting to a quarterback who is struggling mightily, and we thought he was ageless. He really has proven he is, but Tom Brady now and the Buccaneers, Benny, obviously we see has gone through a divorce, and this was something that he appeared distracted. It appeared that things just weren't right in Tampa coming into this season from the get-go. But, from your experience, and obviously we can't speak to the exact details of what's going on in anybody's life, but from your experience, like, how difficult can it be sometimes for a player, even the best players, to compartmentalize personal life and professional life when it comes to playing NFL football?
I think it's very hard. I think it's very hard, but I like what Tom Brady did in terms of like just coming out and saying like, "Hey, this is what's going on in my life, and now just give us some privacy." I think that will make him play better.
Hmm.
It's like, "Hey, this is out here. We now have let everybody know. Like, please give us some peace and space." I think that was a big time move by him, which will also create some mental clarity because now everybody's wondering like, okay, Tom Brady seems distracted, and now he comes out and says, "Hey, I'm getting a divorce. Please give us the space and respect." Now everybody knows. So now this isn't a talking point anymore.
Hmm.
We know he's going through a divorce, and we know how uh, we know that it could be. We know we could struggle with that if that were to happen in our personal lives. So I think him coming out and saying that was super important. Not for us as people, as I think, but just as for him, it's going to just
To
create a lot
function.
of
Yeah.
mental. It's no different than the Kobe Bryant and what he was going through and how he was able to handle it. He's the one I've seen handle it with like it looked like he like created a separate persona in his Muse documentary where he talked about like how that's where he created the Black Mamba. Like Kobe deals with this, the Black Mamba deals with that on the court stuff. So, but
Hmm.
it's definitely a hard thing. We're all human beings, and Tom Brady, he's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, but like he's still a human being at the end of the day. So,
Yeah.
um, but he
His
doesn't get all the blame. He's one of the leaders there, but that's the time where like they look off sync. They look like they don't care anymore, which is one of the things that I think
yeah.
now we need to give more respect to Belichick and Brady because the partnership was really good because the sustained success and things like that, what they did in New England. If Tom Brady was going through this in New England, I don't think they would have a losing record.
Yeah, you can see Benny like when there are some times where you can see his expectations for how a certain route's going to be run or how a play is going to go or how a game's going to be managed when it doesn't go. You can almost see that look in his eyes of I know it was supposed to go one way, it went this way again. It's like that he's had so much repetition at it being done right that he can't conceal his disgust for it going wrong because he knows in the moment it's like, yeah, he goes back and watches the film, but he knows exactly in the moment what was supposed to happen and what didn't and why. And that's you're right. I mean, they did it together at such a high level for so long. And I wanted to shift or stay in the NFC South and ask you. So you're obviously pointing out the Bucs are really struggling as a team. The
Mhm.
Saints have struggled and dealt with a lot of injuries, but they now just come off a huge win that they had to have, shutting out the Raiders. And this division, I mean, the Falcons are leading it at 4-4 right now. And not to put the Falcons down, but do you look at the Bucs or the Saints, despite their bad starts, and see a team in either of them that you believe could grab a hold of this in the second half and emerge and kind of reassert themselves?
I think both of them will reassert themselves. I think Tom Brady's always going to figure it out, especially if you give him his bye week. He usually comes back after the bye week and he's like clicking on all cylinders. He has answered all questions. He's had his sample size of the season. So I think they definitely will reemerge. And then the Saints, coming off that big win, they still don't have Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry. They're still missing like key people that are their go-to. So it's going to be interesting to see that division come down to the wire.
Yeah, no doubt. Um, you mentioned earlier too about the league is very even. There's a lot of parity in the league right now, and even though we still have a half season to play, Benny, I look at this and I feel like I'm seeing the Bills, the Chiefs, the Eagles, and everybody else. And other than maybe the 49ers in my mind, I'm not sure I'm willing to say that any other team outside of those four could win the Super Bowl. Do you agree with me or disagree with me there?
um, I would say like there are 16 teams right now all in it. Just because you with what we saw with Cincinnati last year,
Mm,
all you need is a team to catch that lightning in a bottle. I mean, you even think about the Giants right now. You think about the Ravens right now. Like these are teams that can go on runs.
mm.
and win multiple games in a row. I won't even put the Packers out of it. Once they figure it out, it's crazy that they didn't make any moves at the deadline, but like it's still Aaron Rodgers at the end of the day. And then you think about Tom Brady at the end of the day, like Tom Brady can easily reel off 8 straight, and they cannot lose a game for the rest of the season with the way he plays and how he conducts himself and who he is as a person. So, I would I think there's multiple teams because it's just so hard. Like Buffalo looks unbeatable right now, but I've been a number one seed or been on a team with a number one seed where we had 14 Pro Bowlers my rookie year in Denver. We had home field advantage, we had everything, and we lost to Indianapolis in the divisional. So like we didn't think we were going to lose to them. We blew them out the first game of the season. Like I think we beat them like 35-14.
Wow.
We go on a run. We go 12-4. We got home field advantage. We're looking to the Patriots the following week, and we get beat at home. So that's why the NFL is the best. And you have these quarterbacks now. I think we're probably going to get ready to talk about. We have these quarterbacks who can now run and who are dual threats. Like this is becoming a dual threat league, and it's going to be hard for the league to catch on because there's still only 11 players out there. So.
Yeah, like I said, man, you're the host now. I mean, come on, these transitions are so good. No, so that's actually a story I'm working on right now is, a lot of teams, and it's not a lot of the better teams. So you have the Eagles, the Giants, the Buffalo Bills. The Falcons are only 4-4, but they're leading the division. They have a quarterback with wheels and Mariota. Even the Chicago Bears have kind of dug themselves out and become like a respectable team using a quarterback with his legs. Lamar Jackson obviously set the tone on this, et cetera, et cetera. But Benny, we've seen running quarterbacks before. Why are defenses not able to handle this run-heavy attack that includes the quarterback so often now in the modern NFL?
I think it's the play calling now. I think it's the play calling plus the athlete plus the arm. You got the Lamar Jacksons, you have the Daniel Jones, you have the Josh Allens of the world who can run and who can make the right decision. And I think that's totally different. Now the play calling isn't just, hey, like we're doing a QB draw. No, we have this RPO with a Saquon in the backfield or a J.K. Dobbins in the backfield, along with Lamar Jackson's legs, along with a Slayton on the outside in New York, or some of the receivers that they have in Baltimore. It's just now it's not turned into college because the play calling is still very, very specific, and it's still the play calling is still unique in the professional game.
It's not college. You're saying it's not. No, it's oversimplifying to say like that's a college scheme coming to the NFL.
Yeah, no, it's not a college scheme. It's not like the Chip Kelly scheme coming to the NFL. But now, like they've built the offense around Lamar and all his talents and strengths. New York has built the offense around Daniel Jones and Saquon's strengths. So now it becomes harder when a player's operating from a strength and not in a box. The player can be super successful. Like,
are defenses smaller, do you think, or is that like when you look at the linebackers and the guys trying to take on these runners on the second level, do you see smaller athletes trying to bring down these big, guy like Josh Allen or even Lamar now has put on some muscle? Is it more difficult even for them to just make these tackles because they've started schemes had to defend the pass when the NFL opened it up, and now they're bringing it back down into the box, and they're not as effective there?
These offenses are just creating so much space. There's so much misdirection. There's so much movement. It just becomes harder. That's why when you're Baltimore, you make a trade for a Roquan Smith, somebody who can go sideline to sideline and make those plays. It's huge.
Great point. I didn't think of it that way.
That's why you make a trade for a Robert Quinn if you're going to play the Giants later on in the year, because you need somebody to be able to rush the passer and then make those plays.
Benny, you just that everything just clicked. I'm actually taking notes to make sure I remember that for when I'm actually writing this story, because actually I was talking to some executives about the Roquan Smith, and like you said earlier, great fit for team and player, but you don't often see middle linebacker, inside linebacker. You don't see teams spending huge assets on that position as much in the modern NFL because it's considered more replaceable than it used to be. But you point out a great thing here to me that's kind of light bulb going on for me is that's a trade with Baltimore saying, no, no, no. We see where the NFL has gone this season, and we need to catch right back up on defense.
Yeah, they're going to need that in the AFC and potentially who they're going to play. If you play a Buffalo later on in the season, you're going to need a middle linebacker to be able to make that play. So if you're playing at Kansas City later on in the season, you're going to need that type of middle linebacker.
Benny, you always make us smarter. Thank you so much again for joining us. We're here going into week 9 of the NFL season. Before you know it, I'm going to be in Dallas on Thanksgiving Day covering
Nice.
Giants Cowboys with playoff implications. Who would have thunk it?
Let's go. Let's go.
Let's go.
Love to be on it, man. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it always.
You got it. Talk to you soon.
All right.
All right. Welcome back to Talkin Ball with Pat Leonard. Let's get over to Pat's picks for week 9 of the NFL season. Turned in a tough record last week, 5-10, but still atop the daily news rankings at 500 exactly so far this season, basically 61, 61-1 record. Every Friday, I post my full picks on my Instagram page at PL on NFL. But here on Talkin Ball, we give you some of our highlights and we give them to you early in the week. So let's get right to my favorites for week 9. The Seattle Seahawks +2. So underdogs at the Cardinals on the road in Arizona. I love Seattle in this game. The second time these teams are matching up in 4 weeks. The Seahawks won 19-9 in week 6 in Seattle. Obviously a very difficult place to play. But the Arizona Cardinals scored 3 points on offense this entire game. The only reason they ended up with 9 was because they blocked a punt in the end zone and recovered it for a touchdown. But Kyler Murray and the Cardinals are going to struggle to move the ball again in this game. I saw the Seahawks in person last week, and they contained Daniel Jones's running ability. Kyler Murray obviously is more difficult to contain in the running game than Jones, but both mobile QBs and, frankly, the Seahawks defense is fast. They're well coached by Pete Carroll, a veteran NFL coach, and they're fast. I was really impressed watching their defense, Michael Jackson, Ryan Neal, Quandre Diggs, and Tariq Woolen in the secondary. Jordan Brooks at inside linebacker was excellent in that game. And Uchenna Nwosu, and even the veteran, Bruce Irvin, was extremely disruptive throughout the game against the Giants. I think the Seahawks are playing too well right now to be underdogs in this game, even on the road. The Cardinals, frankly, just don't strike any fear to me into a team in the Seahawks, or really one of the hotter ones in the NFL. So give me Seattle there. Love that pick. Jaguars +1.5 point underdogs against the Raiders at home in Jacksonville. Now, the Jags are 2-6 against the spread. The Raiders, though, are 2-5 against the spread and coming off a shutout loss on the road in New Orleans. Not a lot of mojo going on with the Raiders. One of my big preseason picks. Obviously, a lot of egg on my face there, but I'm done picking and supporting the Raiders until they show me something. And it's very difficult in this year's NFL to get shut out. I mean, parity has never been greater. Any team seemingly can win a game every week, and the Raiders seem to be consistently disappointing so far. They need to turn it around fast. And frankly, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they have shown that they don't know how to close and finish games and win. And so that's why they've lost 5 in a row. But when you look at the Denver game, you look at the Giants game, you look at a lot of these games, they're moving the ball very well in chunks for a lot of these games. And then they're just making mistakes, especially in the red zone where Trevor Lawrence has to clean it up. Those turnovers are hurting them. But I watch their games, and I've watched enough of the Jacksonville Jaguars to know that they play well enough, consistently enough through early parts of their games, that the Raiders, a team that just hasn't been able to put a full one together really yet almost all season, is going to struggle. And I think because the Raiders haven't shown that they know how to win, I think Jacksonville is actually going to get off the schneid here, get a victory, and snap its losing streak. The Titans +12.5 at the Chiefs. I like this game if you're playing with some house money and Ryan Tannehill's status is still up in the air. This line is this big because the bettors are waiting to see if Ryan Tannehill, the starting quarterback, he missed last week's win over the Texans with an ankle injury and an illness. Mike Vrabel has not clarified yet early in the week what his status is for this game in Kansas City. But you can tell that this line is based on the bettors expecting and at this moment feeling like Malik Willis, the rookie, is going to make his second start. That's all you can believe right now because there's no other information. So if you have some house money to play around with, I would sprinkle on this line now, early in the week, before Tannehill's status maybe improves and it changes. And then it's going to look a little bit more reasonable and probably be more difficult to put some money on the Titans. So sprinkle it with some house money if you have it. If you don't, stay away, wait and see. Falcons plus 3.5 against the Chargers in Atlanta. This might be my pick of the week. I haven't decided what my best bet is, but this might be my best bet because, listen, the Chargers are coming off a bye, but their defense just isn't good enough. Their run defense isn't any good. They give up 27 points a game, which is the second most points per game allowed by a defense this season. The only team worse is the Detroit Lions. And the Chargers, I mentioned earlier that the Seahawks are fast on defense, and they impress me, and they're actually getting better every week. Brandon Staley and the Chargers defense still haven't demonstrated to me that they have a consistent plan to stop the run and to keep points off the board. It's just really that simple. And so until they can prove they can stop the run and consistently prevent touchdowns, I'm not going to pick them on the road to cover, let alone a 3.5 point spread against a Falcons team that is leading the NFC South at 4-4 and relies heavily on its run game with Marcus Mariota at quarterback to get it done. There's nothing that tells me that the Chargers are going to just snuff out the Falcons and stop the ball, stop their momentum. And I think the Falcons are going to have the ball a lot in this game, regardless of whether they score a lot early. And I just think it's impossible for me to look at this and take the Chargers. Yes, the Falcons allow 25.6 points a game, but you saw against the Panthers. I mean, they were giving up points, but they were scoring too. I don't see them losing big here, even though Justin Herbert is a talent. The Chargers just haven't shown it to me yet. And then another one I like, though I'm not sure if I'm not necessarily telling you go bet this one right now, but the Dolphins are 5-point favorites right now against the Bears in Chicago. And I understand the Bears, the team might react a certain way to having Robert Quinn traded out, to having Roquan Smith traded out. But one thing I like about the Bears, and there's a lot of things to like about what they've done, even though obviously, you don't expect them to be a playoff team. But in the year one of a rebuild, they've traded away two of their better players. But they play really hard for Matt Eberflus. When the other team's offense is on the field, the Bears defense makes them feel them. I watch a lot of games. I watch all these games every week. I go back, watch the film. I'm at every Giants game. And the Bears are the team that I have so far seen that hits the hardest most frequently, that makes people pay for staying in bounds instead of stepping out. I think I really like what I see as far as players being invested in what Matt Eberflus, the defensive head coach coming from Indianapolis, is trying to teach them and get them to buy into as far as attitude and effort. And so the Dolphins have a lot of skill. They're very good. They add Bradley Chubb. They add Jeff Wilson. You have to like all that at the trade deadline. But as much as they went into Detroit and scored a bunch of points and beat the Lions, they only beat Detroit by 4. I mean, the Bears are way better than the Lions and way tougher to play than the Lions. And the Dolphins only beat the Lions on the road by 4 points. So I look at the Bears, I see them adding Chase Claypool. I see Justin Fields, playing some exciting football, even though it's up and down. And also that run element that they've now committed to more with Fields. Yes, they're coming off a tough loss to Dallas, but Dallas has a very fast, very good defense. The Dolphins have some good players on defense, but they could give up some points too. I think that the Bears cover here. Again, it's not as strong of a recommendation for me, I think, as the Atlanta game, the Jaguars game, or the Seahawks against the Cardinals. But I'm going to end up picking the Bears to cover this 5-point spread. Wouldn't be surprised if that line shrinks a little bit as the week goes on. And then finally, this is a look but don't touch. I just wanted to bring it up because it opened my eyes. The Bills are 13-point favorites at the Jets. Jets fans have to be looking at this line and thinking, we were so excited about this season and how it started and about a lot of our team. Of course, the injuries have really hurt them, but Zach Wilson's inability to play NFL football at the quarterback position stands out to you when you see a line like this because the Jets defense is pretty good. It seems like the players are rallying around Robert Saleh and this team. And it seems like there's a lot about them, even at the skill positions, that could compete at least more than a 13-point line at home. Obviously, the Bills are the best team in the NFL. There's no reason they shouldn't be favored by significant points. But just looking at that, if you're a Jets fan, it makes you shake your head at just the disparity at the most important position on the field, which is everybody knows the reason that line is what it is. All these lines, by the way, presented and taken from Bet Online, our sponsor here now. Thank you so much to Bet Online for jumping in and joining up. We're thrilled to have you. And as I always say every week, please go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, my YouTube page, the Believe YouTube page. Subscribe, like, review. Every piece of feedback and support helps. So we always appreciate our listeners, our viewers. Thanks for joining us here in week 9 of the NFL season. We will see you next time on Talkin Ball.